Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Yellowjackets Season 3, Episode 5. Did Ty do that? My name is Grace Leeder, but of course I'm not alone. I'm here with the other half of G&J Internet Technician Services. It's Jess Sterling. Jess, how you doing?
Oh, I forgot my cap and puffy
Oh,
vest
come
today.
on.
Sorry.
Nobody's going to believe that we're real internet service technicians.
Just need to find an old guy with dementia and you'll get right in, I think.
Yeah, I feel like all around I mean, I don't know. I guess we don't know. I guess we know that Lottie's dad is. Do we know much about? I'm trying to like. I'm gonna. But was worried it was gonna be a thing like we don't know how bad he is, and it's like, remember when he like tortured his right? Yeah, he like put her in like they did like uh the like
Electric
electrotherapy.
shock therapy.
Yeah. Okay. All
Um
right. Fine. Yeah. Bad.
which I will say at the time we were pretty critical of because the way in which they depicted it isn't exactly like there are very humane ways to do it. Wasn't the way to depict it on the show, but I have reason to believe that Marty is not so great of a guy, which I'm sure we'll get into on the podcast, but
Mhm.
also just from prior moments we've seen him. He felt like he was pretty down on trying to get Lottie the mental health help that she needed, even from when she was a very young child. So,
Right.
yeah, Marty just seems like a rich old mean white guy. You
Mm.
know what else is new?
Hate him. All right. Well, we're here to recap episode 5. We're gonna recap it. We are looking to put a theories pod on the calendar. So if folks want to send us in theories, we will come back if that is of interest and you send in your theories. So we'll look to do that. Did Ty do that, Jess? We talked a little bit about just for I think that for me, one of the big things is like, Lottie's dead. She's just dead. She's at the coroner's office. She's dead.
Toe
Misty got her
tag
stuff.
confirmed.
Yep, she's gone. Which was I think a little bit like I think I was more on this than you were. You were like, that was a police tape. I think she was probably dead. And I was like, you never know. Turns out Jess knew. So we get the fallout of that, and then obviously we get the fallout of the trial of Coach Ben. What did you think of the episode?
I thought I said this to you a little earlier today. I felt like this was the first episode where I was like, I looked at my phone once or twice, if that makes sense. Like I was like checking the time run on it. Like I'm thinking this was the first episode where it felt a tiny bit wheel spinny. I still really
No, the
enjoyed
ones where
it.
they cut the brakes was wheel spinny.
That indeed was wheel spinny. And I'm really thinking like Walter probably didn't have anything to do with that, but who knows? But um it was the first episode where I kind of felt like we could have picked up the pace a bit. That being said, I still greatly enjoyed myself. I still very much enjoyed the Misty Walter Shauna shenanigans in the present day timeline. There's still a lot to love, and I do think we are moving forward. It was just I think it was the 1-2 punch of like we're going to spend all episode on Lottie's death and kind of not really get too far. And then we're also going to spend all episode threatening to kill Coach Ben, and then just as it's going to happen, nah, he's all right. He's okay. We're not going to do that. So I don't know.
Jess, would you allow me just a moment? Would you allow me something? Would you allow me to
Yes,
do
of
something?
course.
All right. Yellow Jackets creators. So I'm gonna look right. I'm looking right at you. Are you listening to me? Are you listening? What the hell? Where's Hillary Swank? Where is she? What are you doing? Where's Joel McHale? You
I was
told me.
just
What the hell? You told me I did this thing. I just don't
Mhm.
take a break for a second. I
Yep.
told my to college. I was like, every week we should do a segment. We'll be like, what do you think the big thing is? You want to know next? What do you want to do? What do you want to know? We'll figure some. We'll like yeah, and then we'll oh that'd be so fun if we see that next week. I said week 1. I was like, we should probably see Hillary Swank next week, and I've done it every single week since then because you haven't put Hillary Swank on the show. Is she on the show? Was that a mistake? Was that a typo? Oh, I don't know. Okay, I'm back, Jess. I hope they
Okay.
heard that. I don't know what they're gonna do about it because I
Yeah.
think they filmed the season already. But
I
there's
don't
no
know
what
what's
would you
happening, where
what would-
Hillary Swank is. Where is Shauna's stalker? Like this episode, we got nada on that. Like seemingly Walter was her only stalker this episode. So like it would have been fun. It would have been fun if we had Misty and then you have Shauna's car coming in behind that, and then you have
yeah,
Walter's car coming in behind that, and you're gonna have Hillary
yeah.
Swank's car coming.
Listen, shout out Jason Reed, who's the #1 Hillary Swank hater, so he's pretty happy that she's not on the show.
Oh.
But I've watched 2 shows this year where everyone's like, hope Hillary Swank's gonna be there, and then she's not on because she was in the next Karate Kid, Jess, in like the
Oh.
90s, and so everyone was like, she's gonna show up in Cobra Kai, and she didn't. Spoiler alert: she didn't show up in Cobra Kai. They're like, but at least she'll be on Yellow
Well,
Jackets.
this one we confirmed she was cast.
Unless I think that they made a big typo. They were like, we got Hillary Swank, and then Swank. That's basically
It is
that's
spelled the same, but
the
it's just
same.
pronounced
Yeah,
Swank.
yeah. Anyway, it's fine. I disagree. I think a little bit in terms of the episode feeling wheel spinny. I actually quite enjoyed this one, almost like I think the whole way through. I thought I'm definitely feeling a particular way about an adult version of this character, which we're gonna get into in a bit, in a way that I thought was like, I'm a pretty actually upset. Love Misty. I think not only is Misty like back in her element, she's doing detective work, but also she's so
Citizen
funny.
detective work.
She's sorry. I would know that
Dare you?
if I was a detective citizen. She's very funny this episode. I have like many moments where I was just like messaging you the lines that Misty says in this episode that I want to repeat because they're funny. And I really like the Coach Ben stuff. I think that's and I think what I like most about it is sort of we were, sometimes before we started the podcast, we started to talk about a bit of like a flow of how we might get to certain topics. And we're talking about Coach Ben, and you're like, oh, there's kind of like three things within Coach Ben. I was like, oh, I think it's like the sign of one of the better televisions in the way that they can separate out individual stories to like build themes between those characters and build moments with those characters, and then also tie those together in a way that feels really satisfying. Like, again, I go not to like keep, even in season 3 of the pod, being like, the Ab storyline really sucked. But that's my big thing, is that like that storyline sucked because like I guess at the end it does kind of come together, but like the actual Adam piece of it like was never really like important to the rest of the show, other than to show, I guess, Shauna's paranoia. So that one like didn't work. Whereas I feel like this is a really good example of the way that like whether or not Coach Ben is going to die has actually 4 different distinct storylines within it, I think, between Shauna and Melissa, the Lottie, Akila, Travis stuff, the Van Ty stuff, and kind of the Misty Ben stuff, which I think, so I just think that's like really excellent crafting of television. I do think it highlighted once again where I feel the show is at in terms of, I think the stuff in the 90s is by far the most compelling story on the show. Whereas I feel like the modern day storyline is the best like acting and best performances of the show. And those are just like, they're like seasoned vets. They have like such an all-star cast there. In a way that I think it's like, that's really like holding that together, I think, the modern storyline, because, and I was trying to think about why that was happening. And we were chatting a little bit. I think I go back to this thing where the modern day storyline has to, because it has potential things that are answers to questions in the modern day and in the 90s, it has to withhold much more information than the 90s storyline does. The 90s storyline is happening chronologically. And so basically, like, there's like the only things we don't know about the 90s in terms of like where we are in the story is like, the wildernessy stuff. Are there other people out there? How are the signs? There's a lot of that stuff. And then there's like kind of like, did Crystal go missing, which we're not even really worried about right now.
Well,
Everything
and
else
who
is,
burned down the cabin, I guess, is like the
there
other
is who burned.
biggest. Not that it matters, but it is a thing on everyone's mind in the 90s currently.
Well, I do think it matters. I do think it matters. I kind of wondered to not like, Steven Kruger, whenever he said like, it doesn't really matter, but I actually think like it doesn't matter for Coach Ben. This is, they don't really care whether it's true or not. But it does matter for us as a television audience, the fact that there was so much time and attention put to like, did Ben do it? And I think it's implied he did not do it. But my point is that they're sort of moving chronologically and have a little bit more freedom, I think, or they're like, the structure allows them to sort of play with mystery in a way that I think is harder for the modern day storyline. I was talking, my comparison point for this was Severance, where because Severance has innies and outies, kind of both worlds get to play in like unveiling information and finding out more information at sort of not quite an equal footing, but much more closer than like, if you find out something about the modern day, it potentially tells us something about both storylines, where I guess it's the same is true, but
Well, it's
I
the
don't know.
pacing, I think, is the biggest thing, because with the 90s, they're able to jump forward a few months. They're able to play with time more than the present day is, because they have to mostly go day by day, if not like, they can jump a little bit forward in time like they did between the two seasons,
Yeah.
but they're really not afforded the ability to go much further in time because of all the mystery and fallout and everything that's going on. I agree with you. I think the present storyline, if you don't have people like Christina Ricci and Melanie Linsky and all of the incredible cast,
Mhm.
I think it suffers much more. I think they're doing a great job at utilizing the actors that they do have and giving them really fun stuff to work with, right? Like, I'm riveted anytime Christina Ricci is playing Misty. I don't
Mhm.
really care what she does because she's so entertaining and she's so funny. But
It's
also
a
at the same
Misty or Box show. Is that anything?
no, it's not. I hate to break
Sorry
it
to
to you.
interrupt you,
It's
but
not
I had to
anything.
tell my bad joke. Misty Urbox show.
Mr.
No,
Misty or Box. No, it
it's
just doesn't work. It doesn't roll off the tongue, I think is the problem.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I do think I'm just hoping that we're not, because there's 10 episodes.
mhm,
I think, of course, by the time we get to the midpoint, it's like they can't be firing on all cylinders for every single episode, right? And I often find that when I really love an episode, and this is not just to Yellow Jackets, but for shows in general, when I love an episode, the episode that follows, I tend to be like a little bit more down on because of the high highs of the episode before it.
mm,
So but that's my own issue.
mhm,
I did still really like this episode. I think there was a lot of comedy in it that I really appreciated. And I
mhm,
also think I came away from it with a few more theories, which always
mm.
excites me about Yellow Jackets.
Um, I do think, and this is where I want to start, Jess. I would like to start with the fallout of Lottie's death. And to me, this is actually a very good thing, I think, in terms of adding a thing into the show in the modern day that's a mystery that is not separate from the 90s, because I think any reason why Lottie is dead is probably connected to some
Yeah.
thing about their time in the wilderness. Like, that's the show. But in terms of like who killed her, it's going to be like it's a modern day mystery. So I think that is very fun. Ty and Van are out for lunch. Ty would like to try a little bit of everything. I recently went for dinner to a restaurant I had not been to. It was a very acclaimed restaurant. And a few of us were like, yeah, let's splitsies. And then someone at the end of the table was like, I don't do splitsies. You were like, I don't know if I should like do my own order, that everyone should do their order, but no, we eventually did do a little bit of splitsies on our apps and our desserts, I should clarify.
Yeah,
Which I
I
feel like is
think
the way to go.
I'm definitely a splitsies, especially with apps. Oftentimes, if it's obviously depends on the size of the group as well, I personally think. But when it is just me and my husband, oftentimes we'll go halvesies full stop. Like if both of us are like, we think
Oh,
both of these entrees
yeah,
sound delicious. If it's an easy split, right? If it's like a
yeah,
sandwich or something that's very easy to split in half, we will often
yeah.
go splitsies,
That's funny because I do the exact same thing. Whenever me and your husband go out for dinner, we
which is so
splitsies.
often.
It's
Yeah.
so often. It's happened once and you were there.
You
um,
almost ate my dinner.
I did almost eat your dinner. They like put a plate in front of me. I was like,
It's not
"Guess this is my.
splitsies,
I guess
Grace.
this is my food." And then Jess was like, "Actually, I think
It was our friend
friend
Ariel.
I believe it was friend Brenna, who I failed to mention on a previous podcast, and she was a little upset. I think that I didn't mention that I had the lovely opportunity to sit next to her
Mhm.
at the Dimension 20 show. Said, I don't think that's your food. And then we were correct, and Jess got her actual food. Um, uh, okay, so but Van is very sus of Thaisa. And I really love the way that you sort of honed in on the parallels between the 90s storylines and the modern day storylines. Because I think, as much as we'll try to keep this separate, there's a lot happening where like Van, it's very funny. Not funny. It's like horrific. Van is trying to teach Thaisa how to tap into other Ty in the
Yeah.
90s. And then it's like, might be like, I would not like you to have another version of yourself that might go out and kill people in this modern timeline. And so I love the way that this is sort of like these two things coincide with each other, of Van's skepticism that Ty was not it, or so that she was involved in the death of Lottie.
Mhm. And I don't know if we have mentioned this previously, but there was, I believe it was on some sort of a red carpet situation or something like that. Tawny Cypress, who plays adult Ty, had mentioned like, I think we see more of other Ty than we think
Mm,
we do.
mhm.
And so I've been thinking about that constantly through this watch. And I like, there are moments where I feel like Tawny Cypress, I've always said it, it's in her eyes. Like, I've even noticed like there's moments where they're more red. Like, I don't know if they put color contacts.
I know
Tawny Cypress wears color
either they
contacts or
read
what.
I noticed they were, like, they're so ambery brown this which,
Yeah,
like, I think yeah, like, to your yeah,
there's something there.
yeah,
And so I personally think there are tons of moments where we are seeing other Ty, and I think other Ty has gotten very good at making it less obvious which is which, right? Because I think
right,
when we're looking at the 90s, there's like, I think she has like a deeper voice. She's like very serious, right? Kind of stoic.
mhm,
And I think at the modern time, we're seeing other Ty a lot. And
mhm.
I think Van has reason to worry, is valid in her concerns of, you had multiple hours in New York City where Lottie died, where I wasn't with you. What were you doing in that time? And Ty kind of laughs it off. And
She was getting
Van,
all the romantic date stuff ready.
yeah, but does it take that long to like order a carriage and get cash out of an ATM? Not really. Doesn't take 2 hours.
I wouldn't know where to start to have cash on me these days, Jess.
I mean,
I'm fully a
fair.
tap. I'm tapping everywhere.
It's very fair. But Van,
Call me one of
I
those famous dancers who I can't remember their name of. You know, the famous tap dancers. No,
I don't
that's
know
fine.
any
Move
famous
on.
tap dancers. Van is also, I think, probably the most taken aback. I don't know, maybe Shauna classifies this out as well, but with Lottie's death, right? She's saying like, this doesn't make any sense that she just died like that. Like, Van holds Lottie in a certain esteem where I think
Uh-huh.
she views her as being like such a person who is connected to spirituality
She's a
that almost
conduit.
makes
Yeah.
her like invincible in a
Yeah.
way, and
Mhm.
that it's so shocking that Lottie could die. And obviously people have these feelings when people die suddenly, right? Like, people say things like it doesn't make sense. But I read something into that of like,
Denial, right? That's the first stage of grief, supposedly.
yeah, like it doesn't make any sense. And on top of that, we saw Van's handshake, not this episode, but the episode before it. We
Mhm.
saw nothing this episode to give us any indication that Van wasn't feeling well. So
Was
the
another
question is like,
death. The wilderness provide, Jess.
exactly. And did other Ty do that? Did she hear, like, if we're merging these two people, right? Did other Ty hear our Ty saying, I can't live without you. I'm not ready to be without you in this world, and be like, got it. I'm on my mission.
So where do you think this is headed? Because part of me feels like I think we're kind of gonna get like if Ty can figure out. It does seem like she does. She is able to consciously tap into other Ty when she is about to shoot Coach Ben. And so if that was true, and then there's so much more time out there, did was that something she was still able to do that whole time? And now that they've come back, they just like haven't worried about it. I really feel like that's the season one storyline of like Ty not
Mhm.
realizing that other Ty was
She was
around, that
sleepwalking and
she thought that she'd been able to control it and now she couldn't. And my thought is we're leading to a little bit of like Van trying to figure out how to talk to other Ty, like get to other Ty to be like, I need you to tell me what's happening, and try to get other Ty in control to make sure that like she's not just killing people.
right. And the interesting thing to remember and point out is that in those moments when other Ty has taken control, I'm thinking about when she brought Ty to see Van, and then Ty wakes up, comes to consciousness on the side of the road. Ty doesn't have memories of those moments. So theoretically, if we are saying other Ty has
Yeah.
been taking over in the present day more and more, real Ty, our Ty, should be noticing gaps in her memory. There should be blank spots, but we haven't heard her say anything about that, which makes
Yeah.
me really concerned that either, okay, she's hiding this from Van, or the two other Ty and our Ty are kind of like merging and becoming one. Like, there's a possibility there. And I feel like the biggest indication to me that we're seeing more and more and more of other Ty is when she meets up with Sammy. We have not seen
Mhm.
Sammy and Simone all season long.
Mhm.
Sammy requested to see Ty. They
Mm-hmm.
had Steve. Thank goodness Steve is still alive. So we know that.
Mm-hmm.
And he says to her, "Are you not my mommy anymore?"
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, we can read this a couple of ways of like, oh, like, I know Simone's my mommy. I'm with her all the time. Like, why don't I see you anymore? No, 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 no. I read it as, oh, you're the other one.
You're the
That's
other
who
one.
I'm talking to right now.
That's a pretty big reveal of like I feel like this. So we talked last week about whether the whole thing is like a dream, right? The nines and part of me, I do think there's a way in which you can like where I lose like my likeness of that sort of storyline is when like things we saw are not true at all, where it's like that was like that's a thing that never happened and it actually a thing like you were just like asleep the whole time or whatever. I do not like that. What the thing I like have liked about the theory is that like what if this is all happening but in the most you know light possible, rose colored glasses, although there'd be yellow glasses,
Mm-hmm.
look back at the events that actually happened. This is like the nice version, this is like the clean version
Mm-hmm.
of that. To me, pulling the rug out, I'm like, oh, this has been tied the whole time is similar to me to that, where it's like all this stuff is happening, but then to find out like it's like actually other tie is like not around at all is I think something that could be pretty fun to reveal of like how and I wonder if we could figure out a way to like show that in terms of just how much it's been
Right.
other tie the almost the whole time. I think it's
I
great.
think it's been a significant amount of time. Like, there
Yeah.
are so many moments when I've been watching the present day storyline where I'm like, mm-mm, that is other Ty right now speaking.
Mm,
I even think at the very end of the episode when Ty says to Van, like, we got to get out of this house. Like, do you want to
yeah.
leave? I think that's other Ty. I think
Yeah.
she's like cutting ties with the
Nice.
other version of her. And she's like, I don't want any of these reminders of like my family, my previous life. I want to full on disassociate into other Ty.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like again, we didn't see Van having any sort of symptoms of any illness this episode. It didn't really even get brought up. Um so I don't
I,
know. Like, it's
yeah.
interesting like if Lottie's death could have had something to do with that. Van's reaction to Lottie's death, I think, was the most interesting aspect, considering what we know Van and Lottie's connection in the 90s storyline, that she was like one of Lottie's first believers.
Mhm.
And this season, we've barely seen them together in the
Mhm.
90s storyline, Van and Lottie,
Yeah.
that is.
Um, the one the one thing about the cancer storyline that I'm like a little which like this is probably the way it's actually playing out is probably truer to how living with something like that works, where it is there is I think there's this like notion of like your cancer is either you have cancer or you don't have cancer, right? And it's like one of those things is true, which is not really true. Like you do chemotherapy in terms of your cancer goes into remission and then eventually it goes away. You hope that it never comes back. And so I guess what I'm butting up against is like I feel like it's like a little bit of this like especially with something like cancer that feels like oh, you don't have it, and then oh, you do have it, and your hand is shaking, and then oh, now you like you. It's not that she does or doesn't have it. It's like I
Yeah.
guess what is actually happening inside her body, that like feels I think probably more true to what is what would happen if something were like you could start to be feel better even though you have
Mhm.
your cancer is going into remission, as opposed to like this sort of like it feels clunky from a storytelling perspective, like she got told she like doesn't have cancer, and then it's like so I'm just that's one piece that I'm like trying to get over it, because it probably as someone who lives with chronic illness, not cancer, never had cancer, but it feels like actually like the way it's presented in the show is probably more accurate but feels less clean from a storytelling like a I
Yeah,
don't know if I'm
that's
making sense,
really
but
fair. I think what I try to look at instead of like logically, reasonably what makes sense in the real world is what is the show both showing and telling us? And I think it was really significant that we saw Van's handshaking 2 episodes ago or last episode. And
yeah.
I think it is really telling that we didn't see any signs of illness from Van this episode. It could just be that again, they didn't write it into this story for this episode.
100%, 100%.
But it also could be that Lottie's death somehow is making Van better.
Yeah, I think the other piece to it for me is that I think we like sort of spurred, there were people discussing whether or not they think like there's somebody who I think replied to us, I think in the YouTube comments, who's like, I think there's an explanation for every single thing that's happened. I think that to me is where the show is the most fun. I think is where every single thing you could say, you know, it's so scientifically unlikely that Van's cancer would go away, but it's not completely impossible that Van's cancer would go away, you know?
Mhm.
And so I like living in that. So this idea that like like according to the doctors of cancer is not like is like, no, your cancer is gone, right? Isn't that what they said? They've never seen anything like this. Like
It
that's
was
so
like a state of like extreme remission or something.
right,
Like it didn't disappear out of her
right,
body,
right.
but it's not growing and it's actually shrinking at an enormous rate that it wasn't previously,
But
which
I
was yeah.
yeah. I would love to hear from people if like you know, in terms of my experience with chronic illness, like that's kind of how, you know, I don't have chronic conditions though that are um like there is some evidence to show that type 2 diabetes can go into remission, but not type 1 diabetes. So my chronic condition is so different in the sense that like literally until we find I can manage better, but I can't cure my
Mhm.
diabetes. So it's a different chronic condition. And I'm feeling like it's not quite syncing up for me, but it might just because I don't have that personal experience of that. And they're
Yeah.
just trying to, they might be trying to do both things, which is like simplify as much as they can for the story and for it to feel authentic to
Yeah.
someone. And actually, I have a friend I might reach out to about this specific thing this week. I'll get back. I have a friend who unfortunately did get diagnosed with cancer, is in remission, but I might chat with him about that. Okay, do you want to move on to okay? Shauna's initial reaction to finding out Lottie's death is abhorrent. Is to just be like, Misty, where were you? Is
Yeah.
absolutely awful. And I once again feel like Melanie Linsky is just the greatest because I'm like, I still am rooting for her. And yet I'm like, that was a extremely awful thing. She has two pretty awful things this episode. I think we could talk about whether Lottie's dad is like deserving of, you know, whatever he deserves, but she does
Yeah.
like pretend she is his daughter. Uh
Sure.
yeah.
Sure.
uh,
I that's the incredible thing about both Melanie Linsky and Sophie Nélisse is I am still rooting for Shauna, like, against
yeah.
all odds, I really am, and yeah, this is awful. I think Shauna just doesn't believe anything Misty says, and I think I go back to what she said to Misty in the van after the whole break situation. She calls her a psychopath, and that's truly what Shauna thinks of Misty, so of course she's gonna say, "Oh, did you kill her?" When meanwhile, we know Shauna was in the city picking up that rescue cat. So we
That's true.
know she was in the vicinity of where Lottie died. Now, I would argue that the way Melanie Linsky is acting as Shauna, specifically in scenes where she's alone, doesn't read to me like a person who is trying to like cover up a death that she or a murder that she committed. It I read it a lot as like overwhelming guilt of I kicked Lottie out. Like the last conversation we had was really bad. And even though I don't regret any of the things I said, it's still really sad that she's gone. You know, we went through a lot together. Now, I could be totally wrong about that, but Walter thinks there's a chance that it's Shauna. Shauna obviously is very interested in finding out who it is because why? Why would she willingly put on that hat and puffy vest and hang out with Walter for the day if she's not, if she doesn't have a massive vested interest in finding out what the heck happened to Lottie? I think
She is invested. She wore a puffy vest.
she's very invested.
Yeah.
And I also think well, we're going to get into everything going on with Lottie's dad, but that scene specifically, that moment between them, I don't know. I almost read it as Shauna feels guilty that his daughter is dead and that he is mistaking Shauna for Lottie. And so
Mhm.
she's feeding into it to assuage both of them in a way. It's going to make both of them feel better if he thinks he's hugging his daughter and having this lovely moment with her. and Shauna's hugging this guy that's daughter just died and that has dementia and is very confused. And again, maybe I'm giving Shauna way too much credit here. This is all me reading into a lot of what Melanie Linsky is doing as an actor. And I could be totally off base. Then again, I love Shauna and I love Melanie Linsky. So like could be my biggest flaw,
No,
my biggest weakness.
no, I think that there's something like I kind of want to talk through whether or not like is there a world where like if is this show moving to what it felt like at the end of season one. So actually more in the on the run up to actually the end of season one and for the majority of season two, it really felt like at least our core group of people, which I would say is for the adult versions, we really had like Nat, Misty, Shauna, Ty. Then we added in Van and we added in Lottie. And Lottie was initially positioned as very, I think, like adversarial. And that was like the centerpiece of that season two story. And by the end of it, it sort of felt like them all coming together. And then unfortunately, they do this thing where they like are going to kill one of each other, and that ends up in Nat's death. And now we have Lottie dying. And I think that like what's tough is like so badly what I want these women who were girls when they crashed their plane is to like all figure out that like a lot of them have made extremely bad choices. Misty broke um the
Transponster.
transponder. She killed Jessica Rabbit. Shauna killed Adam. Ty killed the dog. Potentially burned down the
Waffles.
cabin. Um, we have all these like reasons, like they've all done bad stuff. And what I so desperately want is like for this like women empowerment show for like the women to like come together and like I guess I don't know whether forgive themselves or whatever, but also to like know that like it's all trauma that they've been through and they wouldn't have made some of these choices had they not been stuck out in the wilderness. And it was a thing that and the different people have to like, I think, if they did things that like, if they had have killed Coach Ben this episode, like I do think that's like I really felt like that's a moment where I was feeling more and more like it's like get pretty unjustified what's happening out here, to a degree. And so like I want kind of like all come to light for them to like figure out what they need to do and like move forward as opposed to like they're like potentially turning against each other.
Yeah,
And I guess
rehashing old trauma.
and I guess the piece of that is like, is this a show? I think I've even seen some of this discussion happen where, who I saw it with was Jeff, where I saw a discussion that was like, I think a lot of people forget that Jeff blackmailed his own wife to try and get money from Ty to be able to like pay off their debts. And like, that's bad. And like, yeah,
Sure.
he's also like a big dummy, and to a degree, like, I think like and I think it's fair enough for me to also like think about like, am I being too harsh on anybody in particular, or maybe even like forgiving people too? Like, am I too easy to be like? Because I do think there's something really powerful in the scene where Shauna pretends to be Lottie. I think it's I think it is gross. So I'll just say, but I also think like I can also empathize with why she does it, which is she does think she's giving comfort to Lottie's father, and I think that this is pretty central to Shauna's character, Jess, is that she doesn't want to feel like she's a bad person. And I think that when you look at how sort of conflict in the show started between Shauna and Jackie, like that's the other one that people call Jeff on, like Jeff cheated on his girlfriend.
I mean, he was a teenager, whatever, at that point. Come on.
I know, but like if you take sort of like everything that's happened between those people, I do think like kids make bad decisions, but
Sure.
Shauna and people make bad decisions. And I think Shauna, more than anybody else on the show, is trying to avoid being perceived as a bad person. If she's the most hiding of and what she wants most, I think, out of is just to like be kind of loved unconditionally. And I think that through the relationship she's had, that's made it extremely hard for that to happen for her or for her to think that that is true. If that makes sense. And the scene where she she hugs Lottie's dad, I think is her having a moment of like, what if that could have been my life of like just sort of having a normal like a dad who just like we don't really know much, I guess, about Shauna's parent, right? I
We
can't remember if
barely
we've
know anything beyond the fact that she didn't grow up as wealthy as Jackie,
right.
and that I
And we've met
think
Jackie's parents, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, they do a weekly or a month excuse me, a yearly thing on Jackie's birthday. Um I I think her parents were a little bit more absent than Jackie's were, but we've never heard any sort of like abuse or anything. Um it's interesting. I guess the way I view Shauna, and obviously things could change the more we watch, but I think she is expressing parts of herself in the 90s storyline out in the wilderness. And we get a little bit of that from Melissa this episode, where she's showing all the sides of her, even the bad ones, even the ones you keep tucked away. And I think whatever ends up happening out there that we haven't seen yet, she didn't feel that it was appropriate or comfortable for her to be her true self since coming back all those years ago. I think
Mm-hmm.
she's kind of put on the guise of being a well-adjusted normal person, but the stuff they went through and the stuff she did and the stuff all the rest of them did, that's not normal. And she's probably not had the correct amount of therapy to work through any of those issues. And yeah, I don't know. The hug is very interesting, and I hope that we get a little bit more that maybe explains it a bit. I think I definitely see Shauna and Lottie being kind of like a Jack and Locke, to make a Lost comparison. And
Mm-hmm.
we've always said like Lottie is the person of faith, right? The woman of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And now more than ever, I think we have Shauna is she is an eye for an eye. She wants justice and she's willing to take that into her own hands when Lottie messes up the shooting of Ben in the 90s, right? Like she feels like
Yeah.
Lottie is way too deep down into the it speaks to us, the wilderness of it all, you know?
Can I tell you how this fits together, though, in
Yeah,
my opinion, which is if Shauna is somebody who says, no, we can be in control. We make decisions. We decide what happens. If you burn down a cabin and we find you guilty, then we're going to kill you. What that means when you come back is that you were in control of what happened. And Shauna wants and I don't think
mhm,
I think that this is true. Well, see, this is where I think it's interesting because it's like it's kind of a complicated. I think it's like more complicated to actually talk about like we're talking about like morality. That I think
sure.
sometimes like we're like I hear the person who was like comparing the show to the CW to a CW show is outrageous because I do think that like there's a lot just in like we're like barely through any of the notes we want to
These are
talk about, and I'm like
complex
yeah.
characters is the
And so,
thing.
the thing I want to say about that is like I think that Shauna believes that the decisions that they had to make, not from the whims of the wilderness, were the decisions they had to make for their own survival. And in the modern day, she doesn't see those as things that were bad. They were the right decisions. They were the decisions that they needed to make to survive. What she's worried about is that she loses control in the way that those things are interpreted once the world finds out what happens. And we'll see to the extent to which I would agree or disagree with her that like those were necessary things for you to have done to survive, right? Like I actually
Mhm.
think like the moment we get at the end of the episode is also pretty bad. And I still do when they slice his tendon of his ankle is
Mm.
disgusting to make sure he can't run away. There's an argument that you can make that she felt they had to do that in order to like preserve their survival. But when you have a modern day, like the modern day media, people like journalists or television shows or documentaries or a Netflix, podcast that gets made where they're going to like decide, are you, Shauna, a good person or a bad person? Shauna would rather live in a world where nobody needs to know. Nobody else has to
Sure,
dissect
yeah.
what we did out there. And that's, I think, a very normal thing, except what it does is potentially create a situation where you get so paranoid that you go to New York and kill Lottie
And you kill Adam, like, she did kill
and you
Adam,
kill
that's the other
Adam,
thing.
right? So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I think just like as I'm framing, and I guess the thing I'm trying to like figure out is like, does this show is like is anybody in the Yellow Jackets or all the other, are we supposed to view them in a way, whether they're like a traditional antagonist or like, is Shauna, like, does she at some point become like revealed as, like, if she killed Lottie, does she move into a
Mhm.
world where she's an antagonist rather than our protagonist? You know what I mean? Like, is that the way the show? And that's where where I was talking about, like,
Yeah.
the team coming together, the girls like figuring out how to resolve the situation. Is there a point where, like, because I think about, like, in terms of like, is this more Breaking Bad in terms of like, we meet Sean and we know like some sketchy stuff happened and we start, but like it's also a character that we saw, like, have a pregnancy that did, she had
Yeah,
a bitch, right?
I
Yeah,
think the thing is I don't think this is this kind of show. I think while we do see characters do antagonistic actions,
yeah,
I don't see this as a type of show where there's good guy, bad guy, and it is that clear and obvious. It's not a black and white sort of show. I think I'm always going
it's a
to
yellow show.
it's I mean it now this season it is.
Yeah,
Um I think I'm always going to come down on the side of like Shauna went through a lot in the wilderness and like of course that doesn't excuse murder, but I think it explains her personality and the way in which she justifies her actions. So and especially because she's played by incredible actors, it's hard to ever want to root against her. And I don't know, in my heart of hearts, I don't think Shauna did it. I don't think that. I don't think that she did
yeah.
that based on the way Melanie Linsky is portraying present day Shauna.
I
In
think I'm
fact,
feeling in the discussion a little bit, is there's a little bit of the, like, looking at what these people are doing and then saying, are they good or bad? And I feel like what I'm doing is like just gut checking that we're like, I think you and I are on the same page of like, that's not really how we're viewing the show. That like every character pretty much, I think it'd be hard to name a character who hasn't done something that you would be like, not great. That's not great. Like,
sure.
to the extent of like, something not so bad to like literally murder.
Yeah.
Actually, literally eating somebody, killing them and eating them.
They've all done
Yeah.
stuff, right? And I
Yeah.
think there we do get some I know I said that feels a little wheel spinny of an episode, but we do get some more information, some clarification on Lottie's actions the day of her murder. So I'm going to walk us through what we've learned,
There's
right?
two things I want to talk. There's two things I want to talk. In an additional to like all of that stuff. There's one other piece that I
Mhm.
want to talk about that happens as Sean is sort of imagining herself and seeing visions of
Yes.
Lottie. Yeah,
Yes. Do you want to do that first? Cuz I
sure.
is it
She sees a
yeah.
very bloody Lottie that we haven't seen before. I don't
Yeah,
think. I
this
don't think
looks
we
like
don't.
Wilderness Lottie,
Yeah,
covered in a lot of blood, like
yeah,
dried-ish blood, right? Because it kind
yeah,
of looked muddy,
yeah,
like very caked on her face,
yeah.
which is interesting. And she does have longer hair, which I only feel is worth pointing out because we have seen moments of Lottie post rescue in the
Yeah.
psychiatric facility, and she had shorter hair. So
I also feel like it looked wintry. Does that feel fair? I don't know if that's fair. It felt
It could
wintry.
be. It was so quick. I had a tough time and,
Yeah.
yeah, it was hard to
Yeah.
pause down and really see it, but I totally agree. I think, it could have something to do with Coach Ben or, like, some animals, right?
To
Like
me, I read it as like that feels like a moment where Lottie and Shauna were actually in lockstep about something. That's
ah,
that's just
yeah,
like what I
okay,
got. Like, it looks like Lottie's looking at who you would perceive to be Shauna and sort of being like, "We're
okay,
in this, right?" That's how I read that, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
okay, interesting. Um, yeah, that actually dovetails perfectly into my little, like, notes here about what exactly happened leading up to Lottie's death. We know that she had been living with her father in a penthouse apartment in the house in like an apartment a penthouse apartment she grew up in for a large portion of her life.
Thanks for
Um,
nothing, Cliff. My favorite line of the episode when he has
for
no information about whether Lottie was there that day or
Lottie
not. Oh, he
Pops,
does.
though. He did say
Lottie
Lottie Pops, which is so
pops.
cute.
Mhm.
She'd been living there for weeks in this penthouse apartment, which also is begs the question: why the hell did she go to Shauna's and say she needed a place to stay? That was a lie. On top of that, where she died is like a dark back alley sort of spot in
Mhm.
this very fancy building.
Yeah.
We do see scrape marks on the walls. Misty kind of holds up the pieces that she got from underneath Lottie's nails. It looked to me like she was fine with it being a match, possibly. Misty also finds the deposit slip from the bank that she visited
Mhm.
on the day of her death, where she pulled out $50K from the
Mhm.
bank, which is not a small amount of money. And if we believe her father, Marty, she was at the apartment the day of her death. Now, obviously, he's not the most reliable of narrators.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we have all that. We know Walter has Lottie's phone records, and then he wiped her phone, and
And he has Shauna's DNA.
he has
Now he has a
Shauna's
piece of
DNA.
hair. Yeah.
Yes. And we also have this line from Lottie's father that I wrote down and found very interesting. This was an accident, pure and simple. Artie down at the station knows his foundation won't see a dime if he says otherwise. So that's very interesting to me, that Lottie's father, Marty, is threatening to not give, I assume the station is the police station, some sort of money to his foundation if he deems this anything other than an accident. Now, that could be as simple, Grace, as like, oh, don't rule it a suicide, or don't bring any shame to my family, right? We know he's very wealthy, very influential.
Because
It
he
could be as
says
simple as
this
that.
to who he thinks is Lottie, right?
He says this to Misty. Did he
Mm,
not?
I can't remember.
I'm
Sorry.
pretty sure he does, because Misty is the one questioning him and like probing for information. Um because like the police are like, "Oh, maybe she was pushed," right? Like it's a question of how she died. And now I'm not necessarily saying that Marty had a hand in it. We just know that they've not always had the best relationship, given that once Lottie's parents got divorced, she moved to New Jersey and lived with her mom. And obviously we know from there she grew up there, she was on the Yellow Jackets, and on and on and on. I have to assume, Grace, based on the flashback we've seen of Lottie's life when she was a kid and stuff we've seen in between rescue and present day, that her parents were in a disagreement as to how to treat what is going on mentally with Lottie, you know?
Mm,
Um because she was
yeah.
on medication when
Yeah.
the plane crashed. Like
Yeah.
I assume that was a that played a big part in the divorce. And I could be wrong about that, but that's just my instinct.
No, I think that's right. I think that in terms of trying to think about why he would say this, in terms of like, if he, this sounds like it wasn't an accident. And so why does he say that? Why is he okay with his daughter having died? He is confused. That to me feels like, and I think the biggest piece of this, and my initial reaction when I saw that Lottie was dead, was I kind of went back to like some of the stuff we were pulling on in season one, which was more of the like, which I actually really like, and I'm actually potentially glad it's here, which is like, if there some other force, people in the shadows, like we do basically know that, like, could just confirm this for me because you've rewatched this more recently than I
Mhm.
have. Lottie drained Travis's, or had access to Travis's bank account, and then
Yes.
Travis killed himself. Is that
Yes.
right?
Well, Travis was, if you believe Lottie, because this is Lottie's recounting of Travis's death, he wanted to get close to death to have a vision, which really makes sense when we think about the gas stuff
Right.
happening in the caves.
Right.
And something went wrong on the crane button, and Lottie could not get it to correct itself, and he died by hanging when she was supposed to lower him down. Again, really, I'm starting to believe Lottie a little bit more now that we've seen everything going on with the caves and hallucinations and
Yeah, the
I don't know.
biggest piece is like, I feel like if you were gonna say like, oh, Lottie's like evil, like it feels like she wouldn't have died, but she might be like, if there's like, wow, it could get like so far into like conspiracy theory stuff here in terms of like, did her dad like somehow, like how involved is he with like the fact that the plane crashed? Like I feel like I could go
Right. No,
so
you could
far
go
down,
all the way back. Yeah.
where like then Lottie, like then in the modern day, like why is Lottie have access to Travis' bank accounts? Because she's being like puppet string from somebody else who is like connected to, like, then I'm going into like, to me, I think there's two things here. which is, why did he pull out the money? And that, to me, the only reason I'm like, I'm honed in on because they showed in the episode. I'm also honed in on it, or she pulled out the money,
Lottie
or
pulled
we
out
don't
the
know.
money.
We don't know, I guess,
Well,
right?
we know it was in her coat
Her
pocket.
coat pocket. So she pulls out money, and the only reason I'm like stuck on that is because Travis's bank accounts were, but like that's where I start to be like, oh, there's like a connection there that they
Right.
very clearly want us to go in.
Is there blackmail? Is that
Yeah.
you'd think I mean, it seems to me like despite the fact that Lottie's father isn't in the best health,
Yeah.
he still wields a lot of money and power
Yeah.
and influence. And so if somebody's blackmailing her, she has a much easier way of taking care of it than pulling out 50K out of the bank. I think this 50K is like more altruistic than the show maybe currently wants us to think. Maybe she's giving it to someone and not in like a bad way, not in like a blackmaily way, and like a she's trying to help someone from the cult or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. One other thing, we never find out what's on the tape that Callie intercepted, right?
We've not figured that out yet.
Okay. I don't know where Callie has been this episode, but
Not here.
Walter having Callie's not her DNA, having Shauna's DNA,
Yeah.
leading to a moment where it's like, oh, it's not 100% match. It's like I don't know how DNA. I wish we had doctors on this podcast. You know, we'd have a PhD
Severance
researchers
has
on
all the
here.
doctors.
Yeah,
We're
get 'em all.
unfortunately unqualified.
Of like, oh, it's a match for like not for Shauna, but for a relative of Shauna. Is
Oh, and it's
Callie?
Callie.
Like, here's where I'm going to tie everything together, which is Hillary Swank, aka Melissa, is the one who is like has something to do with Lottie's death. Callie is also ends up being, because Callie is trying to intercept the tape that was trying to get to like, I feel like there could be something.
Could be.
That's how I can kind of connect a lot of different dots. I'm really reaching, but I'm just trying. I would love for people to let me know what they think is
No, and
is
a
going on.
lot of this is really great buildup for like a potential theories and
Yeah.
feedback podcast
Yeah,
because
we're kind of at a really good point for it. Yeah.
there's a lot of options on the board, right? Like no one is free of questioning in terms of who did it. There's a lot of people with motive, there's a lot of people with opportunity. And so yeah, I mean, it could be, I think at this point, I'm just gonna like list out what we even have as like options for people that killed Lottie, right? We have other Ty,
Yep.
which is mostly just Ty.
Yep.
I think we can kind of cross Van off of the list, in my opinion, at least.
Mm-hmm.
We have Shauna, we have Walter, Misty
Yeah.
theoretically could.
Love
Lottie's
Shauna being like, hey, it's not 1-0 over here in terms of people we've killed to Walter. Sorry. Misty,
so
you're going to put
perfect.
Misty on the board? She's doing investigative
Yeah.
work.
Misty could be, though. I mean, I doubt it, right? She's very low on my suspect list, but it still could be. And then, of course, Lottie's dad, Marty, like he could be involved in some way. And the one other tiny thing I want to make note of before we can probably move on to everything going on with Coach Ben is the at-home nurse aide woman that we saw in Marty's penthouse apartment.
Mm-hmm.
She was around a lot. She was listening a lot. Like, I just feel like we saw a lot of her, and she saw a lot of those people, of the yellow jackets in there.
Yeah, I think the thing for me that I see is like the way that Marty says that like it was an accident makes it feel like whatever happened, people like there has to be some sort of evidence for that to not be true, right? So whether that's an eyewitness that like Marty has to like hold the line on like it was an accident, and Artie's got like Artie can't say it what because like he spoke to the maid first who was like there was a fight, and like Marty's like no, it has to be an accident, or like my money goes, I'll go, whatever he is hiding, whether it's just reputational or directly related to anything happening with the Yellow Jackets, her being there, being like somebody who like saw something that doesn't line up with his story, I think is like where I sort of fit all that together. It's very fun. I think there's quite a bit.
I'm liking this episode more now that we're talking about
there
it.
you go.
I will say, but that could just be because I love when we talk.
I actually think I hate it.
We switched places.
I think I hate it more than Taryn Armstrong hates Yellow Jackets. All right, let's do it because we're a little or pushing time will probably go long, but we also have a bonus pod, so we shouldn't feel so in, but people can listen to this episode. So let's talk about kind of as much as we can with Coach Ben. I think we can kind of just like start with the fact that they decide to do it, and there's a new ritual, Jess, which is they're going to pick the King of Hearts, which Van says this is the
Suicide King,
the Suicide
colloquially
King.
known as the Suicide King because he is holding a sword that is like going through his own head. This is a real
Oh.
thing, a real name for a card that does exist. So this
If
is
I
in
was there, I would have been like, "Fam, Coach Ben isn't killing himself. We are going to kill. This is
I
not
get, but
suicide.
if you ask them though, I think they
He
view
did
it
it
as like he did it
himself."
himself. Yeah.
Okay.
If you ask Shauna, she says, "Well, he was gonna burn us. Let's burn him." Like,
Um,
woof.
biggest biggest tell is that Van cheats at pulling the cards. No, she's like, "Don't pick that," or she just gets the last
She
card.
said she wished she could have said that to Ty, but she
I
didn't.
felt like she got the look that she like knew what the card was, but
Interesting. I
yeah,
mean,
that was
could
my
be.
read.
Certainly
Yeah,
could
it looked
be.
like she was being like, "No, not that one," but she couldn't actually say anything.
Well, I
Um,
think this is actually another good point to bring up that like this whole time I've been under the impression that like nah, Van knows other Ty started the fire and is trying to protect her and all this other stuff. I don't know anymore because when her and Ty were alone, she's just like he tried to murder us. Like she's really passionate about it in a way that
mhm.
reads to me like maybe she does actually believe that.
Yeah. So we get this training session inspired by Steve Urkel and Stefan Urkel, a thing I remember very fondly from my childhood.
Incredible callback. I mean, obviously not. It's not really a callback for them,
Great,
but
an incredible episode name of Did Ty Do That is so good.
I didn't think they were actually going to have a reference to Steve
No, me
Urkel.
neither. Yeah.
No.
No.
No, they try all these things, and I guess for me, this ran a little long in terms of like, okay, we're trying like a lot here. Like, okay, we're gonna have sex to bring other Ty out. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay, we're gonna listen to the wilderness and kill an innocent rabbit that did absolutely nothing. That didn't work either.
Yeah. It did seem to the wind blew a little bit, picked up.
Do you
Um,
think there's any solace for the dead rabbit? Because I don't.
no. All right, let's leave that because we're gonna get we do get a little nice moment between Coach Ben and Missy. Her first boyfriend. So she
And
said,
her
yeah,
first amputee.
your first amputee. You always remember your first.
You always remember your first. And you know what made me particularly sad is that first of all, he can't stop her from saying that once he's gone, right? Like he
Yeah,
can't
that's right.
defend himself.
That's right.
And on top of that, Misty is the last person he'll get to hug. Like,
Mm,
and that me
no,
and I
not yeah.
truly
It would have
credit
been.
to Steve
Yeah.
Kruger. Like, I felt like the acting was really on point when Misty is hugging him. That look in his eyes of at first being like kind of annoyed, but then also being like, "Well, this is my last hug, so I might as well like enjoy
Yeah.
it a little bit and lean
Yeah.
in." They bring in this like massive fish to eat, which again, Grace, something that has happened in the past on the show is when you eat, you die. Like eating is bad. You shouldn't eat and then
Oh.
you die. He did
Mm.
not touch that fish, and you know what? He didn't die.
Very good. Okay, very
So
fun.
yeah.
Okay, so we'll get to Sean and Melissa, I think. I think we'll actually mostly want to talk about Keela's dream.
Yeah.
So, Lottie does reference the Oracle of is Delphi? Delphi? Can't remember which
I
is she.
think
That's fine.
it's
We'll just
I don't
pass
know.
over it. Das opens you up to the truth, she says. Heel's gonna have this vision. She's on the cliff, and her Coach Scott's body is gigantic. And turns out he's the bridge to get them home. He's the bridge.
And I think it's really important to note that she didn't say Coach Scott's dead body. He was alive and he was breathing.
Right.
And so
Right.
that is kind of the key for them to say, okay, we need to save him because on the other side, even though there was darkness and she couldn't see what was beyond him, we hear cars honking, which obviously is kind of a sign of civilization. So they're led to believe that he is important to us returning home. She thought she should be scared during this whole vision, but she wasn't. She felt hope. And so they go and they interrupt other Ty as she is shooting at Coach Ben, and it hits the sad face on the tree instead.
Yeah. So one thing I want to talk is like, so this moment happens where other Ty comes out. Van notices it's other Ty. She goes to shoot Ben. Akila and Lottie and Travis sort of stop it from happening, and they explain everything that's happening. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so bad because this was like the first thing where like I really felt like Shauna takes control. Shauna gets to decide what's happening, and the outcome of what she wanted to happen has now not happened. And I was like, that
Yeah.
feels bad. We're gonna have this like power struggle between the two of them. And I was like, oh, that would be so interesting next episode. No, they do it immediately. Where Melissa and Shauna earlier in the episode, Shauna gets given a gift, a knife sheath that
With
Melissa
an S
made,
on it. Yeah.
an S on it.
Very nice. Very
Yeah,
kind.
kind of cute. If they weren't cutting people's tendons, it'd be pretty cute. But they
No,
cut
yeah,
his.
it's utility. It's what useful,
Yeah.
and it's also pretty cute. And I love Shauna asking, like, why do you even like me? Like, I don't understand why you like me. And Melissa says it's because she isn't afraid of the bad parts of herself anymore. Because she talks about like all this weakness Shauna had before, where she let Jackie treat her like garbage and Jeff treated her like a side
So,
piece.
so the one piece that I'm a little worried for in terms of like the Callie intercepting the message. If we think that it's Melissa who's was like stalking thing, and if their power dynamic is like what Shauna, so I think there's a couple ways we could look at what happens in the future. But what seems to be in this power dynamic is like Melissa sort of being like trying to get Shauna to believe she is too, like these bad, which is like exactly, we talked about earlier. We talked so much about Shauna and her psyche in terms of like not wanting to be perceived as like I did bad things. It was like, no, these aren't
Mhm.
bad parts of these are the things you needed to do to survive. And Melissa's very willing to go along with that. And I wonder if in the future, like, is there a world where that dynamic still exists, that like as Melissa's shown
Mhm.
back up, it's like, I don't think all the things you did are bad, and what do you need me to do for us to survive? Like if Melissa's wrapped up in something else that happened because of stuff that happened while they're out there, like if she's involved in the Travis stuff, if she's involved in the Lottie stuff, like what message did Callie get a like, what do you need me to do message? And Callie was like, I need you to go
Mhm.
kill Lottie. Or is it the inverse where like Melissa's like, I'm tired of being the person who was subservient to you. She's the one who gets made to like cut the tendon, which is just so awful and gross. And my knees don't go weak much while I'm watching television, but that one did. I think it's absolutely
Yeah.
horrific thing to do to a person. So
It's
brutal.
torturous. And the
Yeah.
thing is when I was watching it for the first time, I was like, "Wait a minute. Are they trying to kill him?" No, they're not trying to kill him, because I was like, "Oh, they're just going behind the other girl's backs." No,
That was so
they're just trying
strange.
to make it so it's more difficult for him to get away and essentially torture this guy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it is so supremely brutal, especially because Grace earlier in the episode, when Ty is talking to Van about, what she has to do, she's like, "What if I miss and shoot his other leg?" And Van says, "Well, he'll really want to die then." Like,
Right.
it's so brutal and so difficult to watch, and he's screaming like bloody murder. Misty is covering her ears like she can't handle it. It is awful, and we get this exchange again, a really big like we're fighting for power here between Nat and Shauna, and Nat says like, "You don't have to look so happy about it," and Shauna says, "You don't have to look so self-righteous." And then she takes Melissa's bloody ass hand and brings her into the hut, and Van gives her this little knowing look like, "Oh, you're gay too now? Okay.
I
All
really
right."
liked the shot of them all going, like the wide shot of them all going to their separate things. It
I
shows
thought
you
we
sort
might
of where
see
they
it
are.
was the symbol, like Lottie's
Oh,
cult camp
that's
count. It wasn't,
yeah.
but I thought it might be.
No, I just really like the symbolism of like they're all literally in different places. That those are really excellent
Yeah.
cinematic shot. So that's where we kind of leave the episode. It's a lot happened. Which again, I know it felt like it was like not a lot happened, but actually, like I think this is actually a pretty. This is what I think why the show has been very good, which is that like I do think to some degree like when you think about like what happened, it's almost like things that should have happened that didn't. So it's like they're investigating Lottie, what happened with Lottie, and then like Coach Ben is supposed to die and he doesn't die. Like things that like we don't like we move stuff
Mhm.
forward, but we didn't really like get. We asked more questions than we got answers. This episode, personally, I think all of them are like very thematically rich. Like I think that like both of
Mhm.
these things, I think are so. I mean, obviously to the extent at which like it took us a long time to get through, and then we kind of like not rushed through, but like we're like saved a little bit of time at the end for this other thing, like which I think is like actually kind of like where most of what I thought was like the best television was actually the stuff that we ended up talking the least about. Maybe because it was less like, it's more like character development-y stuff. There's
It's
less
more
to be like,
straightforward, I
yeah,
think, than there's less mystery involved in the 90s.
misty.
No, it still doesn't work an hour later.
Are you saying I'm Christina Ricciing for a joke?
Yes, see, that's the one. That's the one.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see Ty try to summon other Ty and to find out that we kind of already knew, but like she hasn't been sleepwalking at all. So to not really know how to bring her out. I think this is really ratcheting up the tension between Nat, Shauna, and Lottie, right? We talked about all three of them as being like viable options for Antler Queen, and all coming while Nat and Shauna both are more practical, I would say, than Lottie, who is much more spiritual. Nat also isn't really of the eye for an eye mentality. And so having her butt up against Shauna, who's seemingly just wants power at this point, I think is going to be very interesting when we have the fight next episode of what do we do now with Coach Ben? Like, we sliced open his Achilles heel. We're just going to leave him there to play with the animals all day? Were you going to say Achilles tendon?
Achilles heel.
You were
Yeah,
gonna say Achilles
I
tendon.
was.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
think I think we're in a pretty interesting place. Obviously, halfway through. I do just have to again, Yellow Jackets creators. If we could just have Hillary Swank on the show, I just
Come on.
really appreciate it.
We just a little showing of a Hillary.
Just a little Hillary. Just a
We're
little
getting plenty of goats though. The Severance fans are gonna be happy about all the goats.
Goats and rabbits.
Lots of goats.
Yeah, I was like looking at the pen this episode, be like, that's a pretty well made pen. It's probably fake.
And also there's like a mama goat that died, and he's like, you're gonna have to wean the little baby with.
What do you make it? What do you make of that? That seems like. What do you make of that? Was that literally just like, here's a thing that the two of them can talk about, or is there
something going
more
on with these animals? There's a lot of animals.
Yes,
a lot of
I mean,
animals running around. People are hugging them. People are like petting them. Something is up with the animals. I don't trust it. I don't trust that, like, oh, we just happened upon a bunny in one of our little traps and we just slice its neck open. Like, there's so many animals around. And it's very different than the last season where they're literally all starving.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't trust it. That's all I have to say.
I think someone might be up with these Yellow Jackets.
They're up to something with Yellow Jackets.
They're up to something, these Yellow Jackets. All right, well, that's our recap of episode 5, halfway through the season, which is kind of sad, but also a delight that we get to watch Yellow Jackets and talk about it. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Jess, do you have anything else you want to let people know?
No, go find me at the Jess Sterling. I'm podcasting about Schitt's Creek, The Last of Us, and of course, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Felicity. So go check. If any of those things are of interest to you, go check them out.
Love it. Yeah, make sure you're watching everything else from We Know Scripted TV. There's so much TV on right now. Kind of overflowing with the kids, where Josh and Rob are talking The White Lotus. You and I are chatting Yellow Jackets. There is also Severance coverage, of course. Josh, Dr. Amanda, Dr. Melissa. And there's more shows that are coming in the future, and we're going to be recapping them. Tara and I are talking the Tastemakers each week. The weekend program is still happening most weekends, so lots going on here. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're checking us out on YouTube if you want. Definitely check those YouTube comments so you can chat in there. And yeah, we'll be back hopefully with a theories and pondering episode. So send in your feedback to us on social media. Check out my work on parade.com. I am covering Severance. I had they mentioned last time I had a lovely interview with Steven Kruger, and I have an interview up talking all about the trial of Coach Ben from last week with interviews with the cast. So check that out. Hopefully have more along the way. We will be back next week. No, we'll be back soon with the Theories Pod. Until then, licky boom boom down.